In the early hours of June 22, 2025, the United States shattered the silence, launching a military operation that would reverberate across the globe. As most of the world slept, a meticulously coordinated assault was already underway, marking a dramatic turning point in the standoff over Iran's nuclear ambitions. With a powerful airstrike on Iran's nuclear facilities, the US sent a message that diplomacy had reached its limits. The night sky over Iran was lit up by explosions, as critical infrastructure was targeted with precision. Stealth B-2 bombers flying undetected zeroed in on Fordo and Natanz, two of Iran's most heavily guarded uranium enrichment sites. Bunker-buster bombs designed to penetrate deep underground were unleashed in an attempt to cripple Iran's nuclear program at its core. At the same time, Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from a US submarine streaked across the sky, striking the fortified Isfahan nuclear site. The attack was swift, calculated, and devastating. The operation marked a clear escalation, signaling a shift from years of sanctions and covert actions to open, direct military intervention. The world watched in disbelief as news broke of the strikes. The world awoke to shock and uncertainty. Global leaders scrambled into emergency meetings while financial markets reacted with volatility. Ordinary people everywhere watched their screens, trying to make sense of the unfolding crisis. In Washington, officials justified the strikes as a necessary move to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons, insisting the action was limited to nuclear infrastructure and not aimed at the Iranian people. But in Iran, the distinction was lost. The attacks were seen as acts of war, a blatant violation of national sovereignty, and a rallying cry for resistance. Protests erupted in Tehran and anger swept through the streets. The attacks set the stage for a dangerous new chapter. Military strategists on both sides braced for escalation, as the potential for a much wider conflict loomed over the region. International analysts warned of unpredictable consequences, as the rules of engagement were being rewritten in real time. The possibility of retaliation, proxy wars, and regional instability became immediate concerns. The strikes marked a point of no return in US-Iran relations, erasing years of fragile diplomacy and trust. The world now faced a new and uncertain reality. Iran's nuclear ambitions were dealt a significant blow, but the true cost and far-reaching repercussions were only beginning to unfold. Experts pored over satellite images, trying to assess the extent of the damage. The world braced for Iran's response, knowing the region was now on a knife's edge. Military buildups intensified, and civilians across the Middle East prepared for the unknown. The message from Washington was clear: the US would act decisively to stop a nuclear Iran, no matter the risks or consequences. But the aftermath promised instability, uncertainty, and the risk of a broader war. Refugees began to flee, and cities braced for further violence. The quiet of that June morning was gone, replaced by the thunder of conflict and the specter of escalation. The region's fragile peace had been shattered. The Middle East, and the world, would never be the same. The events of that night would echo for generations, shaping the course of history in ways yet unknown. Iran's response was swift and direct, leaving little doubt about its intentions. The world watched as Tehran moved quickly to demonstrate both its military capability and its resolve. Within just 24 hours, the Revolutionary Guard launched a barrage of ballistic missiles at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, the largest U.S. military installation in the region and a critical hub for American operations. Although U.S. and Qatari missile defenses managed to intercept most of the incoming projectiles, the psychological impact was profound. The attack sent shockwaves through military ranks and civilian populations alike, highlighting the vulnerability of even the most fortified bases. Iran's message was unmistakable. American forces and their allies are within reach, and Tehran stands ready to retaliate if provoked again. The display of missile range maps underscored the reach of Iran's arsenal. President Pezeshkian and Foreign Minister Araghchi appeared before the world's cameras, condemning the U.S. strikes in the strongest terms and warning that any further aggression could spiral into an uncontrollable regional war. Iran framed its missile attack as an act of self-defense, not aggression, seeking to rally both domestic support and international opinion. Officials emphasized their right to protect their nation's sovereignty. The world watched anxiously, with millions glued to their screens, uncertain if Washington would escalate further or seek a diplomatic off-ramp. Tehran's dual strategy, combining military reprisal with diplomatic condemnation, put immense pressure on the U.S. to carefully reconsider its next move. knowing that any miscalculation could ignite a wider conflict. Iran insisted it did not seek war, but made it clear it would defend its sovereignty at any cost, projecting unity and determination to its people and adversaries alike. The missile strike was a calculated risk, a show of strength designed to send a message without crossing the threshold into all-out war. Iranian generals weighed every move, aware of the stakes. Iran's leaders painted the U.S. as the reckless aggressor, accusing Washington of destabilizing the region and pushing the Middle East to the brink of disaster. The international community was left to weigh the risks of further escalation, with urgent meetings at the United Nations and in capitals around the globe. The ball was now in Washington's court. Every decision carried enormous consequences, not just for the US and Iran, but for the entire region. Iran had shown its teeth and dared the US to respond, while its citizens rallied in defiance, bracing for what might come next. The region teetered on the edge, with the threat of a wider conflict hanging over every decision, every movement of troops, and every diplomatic statement. The world held its breath, hoping for restraint, as headlines blared warnings of a possible new war in the Middle East. But the cycle of retaliation had begun, and the path forward was more uncertain than ever. The U.S. strikes were part of a broader assault, with Israel launching Operation Rising Lion against Iran's military and security infrastructure. The IDF claimed over 900 targets hit, including missile launchers and key personnel. 11 Iranian nuclear scientists, including Faridun Abbasi, were killed, a targeted blow to Iran's nuclear expertise. Iran reported over 600 deaths, many of them civilians, highlighting the brutal cost of modern warfare. The loss of scientists became a symbol of national grief and anger. Civilian casualties fueled outrage and deepened the rift between Iran, Israel, and the US. The operation's human toll ensured that reconciliation would be even harder to achieve. The scars of this conflict would last for generations. In the aftermath, a battle over information erupted, as officials and experts scrambled to make sense of the unfolding crisis. The U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency reported only partial success. Key nuclear sites were damaged, but not destroyed. Analysts pored over satellite images, searching for clues about the true extent of the impact. The CIA, however, claimed decisive victory, insisting Iran's program was set back by years. Their assessment painted a far more optimistic picture, fueling hope among some policymakers. Conflicting narratives fueled political debate in Washington, as lawmakers demanded answers and clarity. Democrats argued the strikes were reckless and failed to eliminate the threat, warning of unintended consequences and regional instability. Republicans hailed the operation as a necessary show of strength, emphasizing the need to confront Iran's ambitions head-on. The truth was obscured by politics and uncertainty, with classified reports and redacted documents leaving the public in the dark. Did the strikes cripple Iran's nuclear ambitions or simply provoke a dangerous adversary? Experts and commentators fiercely debated the long-term consequences. The answer remained elusive, shaping public opinion and future policy, as citizens and leaders alike searched for clarity. The fog of war extended from Iran's deserts to the halls of Congress, clouding judgment and complicating decisions at every level. The stakes, and the risks, had never been higher, as the world watched and waited for what would come next. The strikes triggered immediate diplomatic fallout. Iran's parliament voted to suspend all cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency, plunging its nuclear program into secrecy. Iranian officials accused the IAEA of facilitating the attacks, deepening mistrust. Inspectors were barred, creating a dangerous information vacuum. The IAEA's Director General condemned the strikes and urged a return to dialogue, but his pleas fell on deaf ears. Iran's hardline stance became a bargaining chip in future negotiations. The world was left guessing about Iran's nuclear intentions, raising the risk of miscalculation. As the region teetered on the brink, a surprise ceasefire was announced. President Trump declared that Israel and Iran had agreed to halt hostilities, thanks in part to Qatari mediation. The ceasefire pulled the region back from disaster, but the peace was fragile. Behind the scenes, secret talks began, aiming to restart dialogue with Iran. Skepticism remained high. Many doubted the ceasefire would last. The core issues driving the conflict were unresolved. Iran's nuclear program survived and animosity persisted. The ceasefire was a pause, not a solution. The region waited, caught between hope and the threat of renewed war. the future remained uncertain. The strikes ignited fierce political debate in the U.S., exposing deep partisan rifts. Congress narrowly rejected a resolution to limit the president's war powers. President Trump remained defiant, vowing further action if necessary. Meanwhile, federal agencies warned of possible Iranian sleeper cell attacks on American soil. The threat, though not imminent, was credible. Hezbollah and Iranian operatives could be activated if Tehran felt cornered. Security agencies urged vigilance, fearing attacks on soft targets. The specter of domestic reprisal cast a shadow over American cities. The crisis was no longer just overseas, it was at home. The strikes triggered a regional earthquake. Israel and Iran exchanged direct fire, escalating their shadow war into open conflict. Violence spilled into Gaza and the West Bank, worsening humanitarian crises. The ceasefire halted major hostilities but left core issues unresolved. Iran's nuclear ambitions persisted, now hidden from international view. Animosity between Tehran, Tel Aviv, and Washington deepened. Secret talks offered a slim hope for diplomacy, but trust was scarce. The region remained volatile, the ceasefire fragile. The world watched, hoping for peace but fearing the next spark. The future of the Middle East and global security hung in the balance.